she had a 38 in her bra at the time. She's tough. She was awakened by a Bigfoot sticking his arm through the window, attempting to pull her out. My name is Robert Dominguez. I am the co-host of Bigfoot Club podcast. I first got into Bigfoots probably like in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was one of the 12 original members of the Texas Bigfoot Research Center. Uh, that was led by Luke Gross, my mentor. And it's now called like the North American Wood Aid Conservancy now. But I left that group in 2003 and I started doing uh, independent research on my own and with other people. And I've been doing it since I think I kind of stopped in 2017, but I do podcasts now. And so I don't do a lot of Bigfoot research anymore. But if someone were to need me, I would happily go back in the field. If someone were to reach out to me and say, "Hey, I need some help. I got something going on my property." I usually will go out and help anybody. And then I was during that time also I was a case director for a paranormal group for 10 years. So I've done a little bit of the cryptid side and I've done the paranormal side as well. So that's how I got started.
Well, did you during those years that you were actually out there, boots on the ground doing research, did you actually ever see a Bigfoot?
I haven't, but I've had some incidents. Like for example, we used to do a lot of research in southern Oklahoma in a town called Moyers. That's on the foothills of the Kiamichi Mountains. And I had a friend of mine that had some property, and every time we would go out there, something would happen. And so there was a couple times it was earlier in the day and we were like scouting some areas that we wanted to put up cameras, and we were walking down this trail, and we all had walkie-talkies. I was walking with a colleague of mine, and then we got called back to home base, so we're walking back, and as we're walking back there was like a puddle of mud and water, and it was a big, probably like a 14-inch print on that puddle and water, and the water was still moving. So whatever had passed that, it was just like one step like into the path and then one step off the path into the woods. So it just took one step, and it was like that was pretty creepy to have that happen to you. And like I said, I've never seen one, but I've had a lot of incidents like that where I was either yelled at, growled at, hooted at, knocked on, whistled at, had rocks thrown at me, had sticks thrown at me. I've had a lot of incidents like that. So some of the screams I've had in East Texas, I've had it where it was so loud and intense that it vibrated my chest. That's how loud it was. And it was not like you're standing next to a train and the train decides to blow its horn, and it was just that. It was just loud. It was just very, very loud.
What do you think Bigfoot is? What do you think they are?
When I first started in the late 90s, I was a staunch believer in it was a primate and it was flesh and blood. But as I left the group and I started doing my own research and talking to Caddo tribes and Choctaw tribes, and then I started just talking to people in general, just started talking to people in general. I'm starting to believe that there's two sets of people in Bigfoot world. There's the flesh and blood, and there's the woo. And I'm not a subscriber to woo, but I've had too many incidents where I've talked to people and they've have some kind of some paranormal or supernatural characteristics within it. And it's hard for me to discredit that or just say, hey, that's not, I don't believe in that. So, me being a paranormal investigator and a cryptid, I'm an honest believer that this animal is probably interdimensional, and they can step in, step out, or even that's not if that's not the case, if I even go this route. If Bigfoots are flesh and blood. They have a spirit and they also die. And if they die, they have to have a spirit. So I think a lot of these cases sometimes that people see these Bigfoots, it was probably a Bigfoot that had passed, and then whenever I interview them, they say, well, it just vanished, it just disappeared, out of thin air. So I kind of go to that case. So right now, I know it's not really answering the question, but it's, whenever you dive into this subject, you get more questions than answers. So hopefully that answers your question, because
Well,
I'm not really sure.
I can understand your point. I think because we don't think of Bigfoot as being a ghost, but
Hmm.
if you put it in the same category as seeing a ghost, and I've known a lot of people who saw a person that was deceased. They saw them clear as day. They interacted with them, spoke with them, didn't know that they were speaking sometimes even to a deceased person, but later on found out that they were. And then they would just disappear, just kind of go away. Bigfoot can have those same characteristics. And so I think you're the first person that's actually worded that, but it's something I've begun to notice,
Yeah,
that why couldn't they be a ghost of a Bigfoot?
right. Because like there was another time where in the same area, the Kiamichi Mountains, because like I'm a staunch believer that Bigfoots, whenever they are walking on Earth, they can see game trackers. They can see them and they avoid them. And so we had a tendency of putting game trackers up to not to be blindsided by a Bigfoot on a certain like path of a property. And so there was times where we would put game cams up, and we would put them pretty high up. We would have a ladder and we would put them up like 6, 7 feet high up. So whatever would break that game cam, it had to be tall. So there was one incident where we were going back and looking at video of one of the game cams, and you could hear something like crunching of leaves walking up gravel, and then as this thing passed in front of it, it was just shoulders, a torso, and a stomach. That was it. There was no arms, there was no head. And I looked at it, and then I looked at my friend. I said, "Did you see that?" And we rewinded over and over and looked it over and over. I said, we at the time I wasn't even in that idea of Bigfoots were ghosts, but we would run into stuff like that, like in those woods, and there's a lot of strange things in uh like the Kiamichi Mountains that I can't put my finger on and say this is what this is, and I couldn't.
I've heard of cases where Bigfoot was kind of like a shimmer. You could make out the outline of them, but it was just a shimmering, could see through
Yes.
it, and crossing a road and then moving into a wooded area and could still see the shimmer, but it would also cause the leaves and the limbs to move as it walked through them. So it was like it has some physical properties to it, or at least some ability to manipulate the physical world. But it wasn't visible like a person or
Yeah,
like a real Bigfoot.
I've heard some stories like that too. And it's like stuff like that. I was just saying before, it's hard for me because like whenever I first started hearing stories like that in the early 2000s, I would just scoff at it. I go, okay, whatever. And as I got into the field more, and I was not um I'm trying to look for the right word. I was not uh just kind of hammered in that, this is flesh and blood, because that's what a group does. A group just like kind of just hammers down and says, hey, okay, this is flesh and blood. And so once I got away from that noose and kind of just walked away and started doing my own research, like I was saying, talking to Caddo and Choctaw um, elders, they would tell me, he goes, yeah, this thing's of, this Bigfoot is never going to be seen by the white man. That's what they used to tell me. It's never going to be seen by the white man. They're part of the earth, and so they're going to disappear whenever they want to. And like I said, I've had cases where I've talked to people, and whenever they're talking about their encounter, they've said this thing was so big it looked like a tractor on two legs, and then it just stepped into the woods and the woods swallowed it up. And I And they used those words, and I said, the wood swallowed it up. And he goes, yes, the wood swallowed it up. It was gone. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. I could see trees moving as it was walking through the brush, but I couldn't see it. So that stuff like that always intrigued me. And I said, man, this is some strange stuff. And I would like talk to other Bigfoot researchers, and some would discount it, and some other people say, oh, that's the way, that's the way they move, that's the way they are. And it's just, I don't know, it's just like one of those things that it's hard to put your mind around that, and you got more questions than answers on stuff like that.
Well, I think sometimes we forget about, folklore and legends of like elementals and, coming
Hmm.
down through history, the all of the earth creatures, even the fairies and the just the beings that have been talked about for years, but we certainly have lost track of a lot of them or have not put them in a very significant form. Many times I've heard of a huge commotion sound going on in the woods, and later on they go try to see the damage done. Nothing. There would be nothing disturbed whatsoever. And you ran into that as well?
I've run in that as well, and times in the woods. And there's, like I said, the Kiamichi Mountains, they're a strange set of mountains. And I've had a lot of different things happen to me that out there. But yeah, I have run across that as well. Uh, a lot of times it's kind of scary, especially if you're by yourself or you're with like a colleague that's not near you, and you come across something like that. It's very scary to be out in the woods, and you gotta know what you're doing, or you gotta, be confident what you're doing, because that's you could disappear like really, really quick if you're not careful.
Sure. What about craft UFOs? Have you seen anything like that?
I'm gonna say I have really, I have like I have issues with seeing stuff in the distance, and I have not. I've been in the field with people that had that seen stuff like in the woods. However, there is one particular story that stumps me. Like I said, this was in the Kiamichi Mountains. I was on the same property that I had these incidents with this one gentleman, and we used to go up to the mountain and hang out and just set up like cameras and just do experiments. And he had a neighbor that's probably like, I don't know, like 200 yards away, and you could see his cabin from like you could see like the very top of his cabin from where we were at, but you couldn't see like in the front yard, or because there was just high grass and bushes and stuff. And so whenever someone would come up the road, we would automatically think it was the neighbor. And he had cut it, he would cut up wood. And so whenever he would pull up, we would go and try to take him some beer, some Texas beer, so we can get wood, so we didn't have to cut up wood. And so he was coming up the road, and I was with like two other colleagues, and I was saying, "Hey, your neighbor's coming up. Let's grab some beer and let's walk over there, and let's trade off some wood." And he goes, "Okay." So we're walking up the road, and you can see these two headlights coming in, because it was around 7 p.m. at night, so it was pretty dark, and these two lights were coming up the road. And as we're getting closer to this car, we noticed that there was not an engine running on it at all. It was quiet, and we all kind of noticed it, and we go, my colleague goes, that's not a car. That's not a car. And so as we're getting closer to it, I think as we noticed it, it noticed us. And so these lights then ran through the woods, and they were dodging trees, and they were changing different colors. They were changing, red, yellow, blue, orange. And they were just flying through the trees, dodging trees. And so we all looked at each other. We stopped. We walked back to the cabin. We all had, pads of paper, because that's how we did it. We didn't have any digital recorders back then. So we all wrote down what we saw, and then we traded it to each other. And we wanted to make sure we didn't feed anybody any ideas. So we just kind of did that, and we all saw the same thing. and it was crazy. And that's probably the closest thing I've gotten to UFOs. I don't know if that was a UFO or if it was spiritual or it was orbs. I don't know. So like I said, there's lots of stuff. That's lots of strange stuff in the Key-Michis.
I hear those stories a lot about the lights and the orbs, and they seem to have some form of intelligence, ability to somewhat interact with people or react anyway when people are around. And the changing of color is another thing, and the intelligence about moving through the wooded area also. So I think that's a fairly common thing in the woods. I don't hear about those much outside of a wooded area or outside of a nature area.
Mm.
Sometimes they'll come up into gardens in a yard or something, but I don't hear about those as much otherwise. So on
Mm.
your paranormal research, what all have you discovered through that?
You know, there's usually on stuff like that, whenever I was the case director for a paranormal group, we tried to handle a lot of people's requests that had children involved in it right away. And so anytime we had like a child being affected by a entity, I mean, but there's been cases where I've been in, we were researching in this one house and we were researching one house and we were taking a break and I I for some reason I became friends with this person's dog like right away and they just took to me right away. And so I was sitting in the living room and I had this guy's dog on my lap and I was just petting him. And there was a long hallway to my left and two of my colleagues were in the back room setting up some other cameras or talking about some audio equipment. And I was sitting there and there was probably like a kitchen to my left and two bedrooms to my right. And I saw someone from going from my right to my left, going to the kitchen, from one of the bedrooms to the kitchen. And all I saw was like the back of someone's head. It was silver. And I saw someone's shoulder, elbow, and back. And it looked like she was wearing like one of those old aprons that you would put over, over it was like it was almost like a vest, like a apron vest that the mothers used to like my grandmother wore it like in the 70s and the 80s and stuff. So it looked like that. And then whenever that this entity passed by, I looked and the dog looked. So both of us looked. And so both of us caught it. And I got up real quick and I walked over to it and it was like cabinet doors that were open, like looking for like a coffee mug or a tea or a tea mug. And the owner of the house goes, "Oh yeah, that's my granny. She used to go in there and she used to look for something like to drink coffee or tea." And so I've had some instances like that, and and then I've had where people just watch too much TV and they I call it TV saturation whenever someone watches too much Ghost Adventures and they tell us they have an event and then we go there and I go, this sounds like an episode of Ghost Adventures. But I've had that too, and I've debunked a lot of stuff, and then I try to be scientific about the paranormal stuff, and but we had so many different stories about and it has to do with like maybe someone casting a spell on someone else. And I've had instances like that. I've had instances where a lady had called us and she said that she took in a stranger and this stranger got infatuated with her. And when she said, "Okay, you need to leave," he had a hard time. He didn't want to leave, and then he wrote on a piece of paper some kind of spell, and he stuffed it in her sofa. And then she was having these incidents where she was seeing um, like this shadow being just walking around her house. And at the time, I think we had because at the time I was doing paranormal stuff, we had a shaman, we had a rabbi, we had a priest, and we had a warlock and a witch. That anytime we would run into people of those denominations, we could reach out to this one person and say, "Hey, um, can you come assist on this?" Because whenever we went into paranormal stuff, we went in there as a way to try to prove this person's having these occurrences in their house or their dwelling or their business, And then once we prove it, then we try to banish it out, and then we would bring whatever, like I said, whatever denomination that they were with. And so this girl was not she was not a church going person. So we brought in a warlock, and he said some stuff in Latin, and then I kind of left it with him. I said, okay, if you need assistance further, we'll assist you, but I'm gonna hand this off to you. And so we used to do stuff like that all the time, and we'd always run into strange stuff, and some people would bring dirt in their houses, and then they had goats in their house, and it's just strange stuff. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, and but the paranormal side it's one of those things that I really really enjoyed, because I really like to help people whenever, because like a lot of times they don't have anywhere else to go. If their spouse or their family's not helping them, or giving them comfort, they got to have a venue or a conduit to seek help. And so I'd always enjoyed being that conduit.
Let me see if I understood you correctly. You said some people would bring dirt into their home and
Yeah.
then they would start seeing goats in their
I
house.
No, I think what okay, I said that. Well, this one lady was having problems, and I think she went to, I think, her daughter's house, and I should have said that. I should have prefaced it with that. She went to her daughter's house, and her daughter was shoveling dirt in her house and had goats in her house, and she didn't have it, like they didn't have any beds. They didn't, it was just really weird, and she was acting weird. And I was telling the lady, I said, well, um, we can we could set up and get started, but I kind of told her, I said, in a way, you probably need to seek medical mental attention with her before we proceed any further, because because a lot of times, people get misconstrued, and they're having a paranormal incident, and then they're probably having some kind of schizophrenia. And not that I'm not making fun of it at all. I'm not doing that at all. But you run into that sometimes, where someone's thinking they're seeing something, and they're just having a mental episode. And but I advocate mental healthness uh, completely. But I've ran into cases like that.
Absolutely.
So
And it's a fine line. And with paranormal stuff, it's such a fine line because we have limitations of our five senses and being able to know what we're really perceiving. And then we
mhm,
have to have reasoning and logic around it and our mental capacity to assess a situation. So I think every paranormal experience, every cryptid encounter, all of these things have to be certainly evaluated with, we just have the evidence is mostly anecdotal, and that's all we have. So, we always have to take into consideration that these things can be misconstrued for sure.
absolutely.
So what else can you tell me? What else have you researched that was interesting?
I was this was pointed out to me probably like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I was doing another person's podcast, and I was explaining EMF, electromagnetic field. And that's for listeners who don't know what that is, it's uh it's the theory that whenever ghosts manifest, they give off this energy, and it's measured in the milligauss. And sometimes when people are affected by it, when there's a heavy activity, some people get like nauseated, or they get dizzy, or they get sick, or they get super in a fear state. And so some people like react to it different. They may not have all those symptoms, but they have it. And then there's a theory, and I've read this somewhere, that Bigfoots can give off infrasound. And like I said, there's no data with this. It's just conjecture. And so I would go back when the people that I've interviewed, and I would talk about infrasound. I say, hey, when you had this incident, tell me how you felt. and they would explain to me, oh, I was, sick to my stomach, or I was dizzy, or I felt lightheaded and stuff. And so the theory I have, and a lot of people don't talk about this, is that Bigfoots, whenever they traverse through a county, especially a heavily wooded county, there's electrical right of ways and there's gas right of ways in these counties, and it's like game and Bigfoot use it as a sidewalk to walk through a heavily wooded county, right? So these electrical right of ways, gas right of ways, I've been there, and I've had a K2 meter, and those give off a lot of EMF. And so I've heard stories, like I've never interviewed anybody, but I've heard stories about hunters that they would go out to these electrical right of ways and they would set up like a tree stand because deers will find an opening and they'll just go through it. And then they'll just use it and they'll like, use it as a hunting ground. And I've heard stories of like Bigfoots being in this area at the same time and chasing hunters out of this area. And the hunters are, from what I've read, they've been very, terrified. Of course, people are going to be terrified if they see a Bigfoot, but these guys, I've heard stories of them like shooting behind them without looking, so fearful of this Bigfoot. And that, in a hunter's life, that's a big no-no. It's a cardinal sin. You don't shoot into the woods without knowing exactly what you're going to hit. So I had the theory, had the idea that these Bigfoots they weaponize these electrical and gas right-of-ways. Why wouldn't they not use whatever EMF that's in that area? And like I said, I've heard stories of Bigfoots being attracted to cemeteries. Why? Why are they attracted to cemeteries? Is it because there's paranormal and there's EMF? I don't know. But that's just one of the theories I've had. Because like when I was talking to this other podcaster, she says, "Hey, the you're describing EMF. It sounds like infrasound." And so I kind of delved into it more. I kind of had the idea, and I kind of talked to other people, other researchers, and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Some people are receptive of it, and some people are not. So, I mean, it's an idea that I had, and I never hear anybody talk about it. So I'm just running with it to see if there's some validity to it with uh, other researchers or other sighting reports.
Exactly. And since we don't have a Bigfoot to research, an actual body
Right.
to know what they're capable of, the way we do others that do have infrasound, is that how
Yes.
it's pronounced? A capacity. So we're kind of stuck with these theories that we can come up with, and just explore
Yeah.
those to the best of our ability.
Yep. So if I were to go back to the field, I'm always going to take, an EMF reader with me all the time because there was one time in particular I went out to East Texas and I went to go. I wish I remember the name of the town. I think it was called Big Sandy, but I'm not sure. But it was a cemetery. It was a Civil War cemetery that had some Bigfoot sightings there. And so I went there maybe like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, and I took some equipment with me. And we're in the middle, we're in the middle of anywhere. There's no electrical lines, there's nothing, no power lines, none of that stuff. And when I was out there doing calls, I was getting there's times where I was getting 20 milligauss. 20 milligauss is a lot. 3 milli, just so people, your listeners know, 3 milligauss is a lot of EMF. And I was getting 20 at times I was doing calls. I don't know why. Like I said, there was no power lines out there. And I was getting like for like maybe 30 seconds, I was getting 20 milligauss whenever I was doing calls out there or tree knocks. And I thought it was strange. And it's on my Facebook. And I was going, I don't know why I'm having this, but it was one of the strangest times I probably had in the field because I kind of had those ideas and I kind of meshed them back together, and it was just kind of strange.
Well, I think a lot of the electromagnetic field energy that you're talking about is also identified around other paranormal type of activity as well
Hmm.
as UFOs and that sort of thing. So There does seem to be some correlation between unexplained phenomena and electromagnetic fields,
Yes,
and Bigfoot may fall into that.
it's probable. So
So, when you do interviews, have you heard any really interesting Bigfoot encounters?
I've actually researched some and I don't know what's I don't know if I could talk about this because it involves a particular part of a Bigfoot or anatomy of a Bigfoot. Am I allowed to talk about that?
Well, it probably depends on the part of the anatomy we're discussing, but maybe you could be vague.
Okay. Um, there's this one story that always hits home with me. I was investigating, and this was probably like in the early 2000s, and it was this one story of this lady. I'm not going to say her name because it belongs to the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. But prior to that, I was part of the like the team that was investigating. This one particular lady, this was out in East Texas, and she was traveling with, I think she was in her 20s at the time. So this was probably like in the mid 60s. Um, so she was traveling with her boyfriend down the road, and he got a flat tire, and it was in the countryside. So she didn't want, he didn't have a jack, so he had to walk back into town, go get help or go get a jack. So she volunteered to stay there in the vehicle. So he walked into town. She was asleep in the cabin of the truck, and during her sleep, she was awakened by a Bigfoot and sticking his arm through the window and grabbing her leg, and he was attempting to pull her out. And she used her other foot to on the panel to keep it from doing it. And at the time she was telling me the story, she said all she could see was its nipples and its penis. And she said it was covered in hair, like the rest of the body, the arm, the hands. She couldn't see the face, but she could, it was grunting at her and it had a hold of one of her ankles. So she had an old Coke bottle that was laying in the floor bed of the vehicle. So she picked it up and started whacking his hand with it. And she said that this probably happened about maybe 8 to 10 seconds, but to her it seemed like an eternity. And she was panicking, she was screaming, and she was crying, and she was just hitting his hand, and he would not let go. And she said she could see through the windshield that two other Bigfoots walked out of the woods, and they were female. And I asked her, "How do you know they're female?" She says one of them was pregnant, and they both had breasts, and they were screaming at the one Bigfoot that was holding on to her ankle. They were yelling at it, and it let her go. And then they all three of them walked into the woods, and she got up and she ran down the trail, and I guess ran into her boyfriend. She was hysterical, and um, whenever we were investigating this, we wanted to go back to the area where this happened. And at the time, it was a dirt road, but now it was under a lake, so it was a man-made lake, so we couldn't go back and look at the area. And so what we ended up doing, we did the Freedom of Information Act, and we got the local hospital's report on her, and it did say that she had abrasions on her one ankle, and then we went to the police or the sheriff in town, and we did the Freedom of Information Act, and they told us they had lost the report and they didn't have it, and they said that they were going back on to some other police reports that she was a drug addict and she was an alcoholic, and so they were trying to discredit her. And this lady that we were now talking to, she was like in her 70s, and we gave her probably like 600 questions, and probably six of them were like redundant, and she never wavered from her story. She never wavered from her story, and that's probably the most physical Bigfoot story that I've read, that I've personally investigated. And to me, I was really intrigued. I think I talked to her for a couple of months after that, and I think she's already passed already. But that to me, that was one of the most amazing stories I've ever investigated myself.
Yeah, because usually we don't hear about them getting that up close to you or
Hmm.
touching you or having any real interaction of that nature, even though in some of the Native American cultures, they do talk about them taking women and children.
Yep. And she was really like, we asked her like what color were the nipples, what color were the belly button, what color was the hands, and she either gave us an answer, she gave us answers every time. She goes, some parts of the nipples were pink, some parts of it was dark brown, and the belly button was pink, and some parts was dark brown. And she said it was like his hair was matted. Some parts of it was matted, like it had like mud or something on it. And she was very descriptive on everything, and even its private part as well. So I mean, it was one of those things that you don't forget. So, um, but it was just it was just a very interesting story, and I wish I could have gone back and talked to her more, but I think she ended up moving, and we lost contact with her, and uh, you know that was like 20 years ago.
It was kind of
So
like the two female Bigfoot may have saved her life or something, actually.
yes, yes, they were telling the male to knock it off and leave her alone, and I thought that was interesting. That was an interesting side of the story. But but yeah, that's one of those ones that I will never forget.
I can understand why. That's interesting. Of course, there's also talk about people disappearing, and no one knows what happens to them, and possibly there's something to do with Bigfoot. I don't know how much evidence there is with that, but it sounds like in this case, if he could have pulled her out of the car or gotten her, maybe she would have been gone when her boyfriend came back.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those things that I know she was blessed by that, and her persistence, and the timely female Bigfoot yelling at the male Bigfoot. So it was a combination of good stuff. So, I know she felt like she was very, very fortunate. And like whenever we were interviewing her, she was a tough lady at that time. She was in her 70s. She was wearing like one of those mechanical jumpsuits, where it was like, where the top part, the pants were all together. And it was like she had a big zipper up front. And then she had a 38 in her bra at the time when we were interviewing her. And she was just a tough lady. She would pull it out, put it on top of the table, and then talk to us. So it was one of those things. I said, man, she's tough. So I guess to endure something like that, you'd have to be.
Well, not too many people have the experience of fighting off a Bigfoot.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing. So, any others that you can share with us?
There was another one. There was one that I was talking about earlier. There was a gentleman that's a really good friend of mine, and he didn't know I was into Bigfoot. He didn't know I was into Bigfoot. I think someone, and he was a contractor that was supporting the company I was with, and so I would dispatch to him, and we would talk every day. And one of his colleagues in his office said, "Hey, you should talk to Dominguez. He's into Bigfoot." And he had an incident where he didn't tell anybody. So he called me up one day and says, "Hey, I need to talk to you after work. If that's okay. I don't want to be unprofessional." I said, "Absolutely not." So he called me, and we ended up talking like 6, 7 hours. And he was telling me, number one, he used to be a wrestler. And so he's wrestled Andre the Giant, and in the 70s and the 80s. And so he he's accustomed to being with someone that's really, really large. And at the time, he went out to East Texas to go confront his brother-in-law, because his brother-in-law was not working at the time. And I think they felt that he was not supporting his wife's sister's needs, on taking care of the family. So he went out to go confront him about it. And this guy lived on open area, which was right next to uh, a river, and he was supporting the family with hunting and fishing. So he had a hard time finding a job. So he was feeding the family with, game that he was shooting and fishing. And so this guy went out to go talk to his brother-in-law, and he was talking to him about finding a job, and they're walking. He was walking him over to the river so they can look through a fish trap that he set up so he could, feed his family for that night. And as they were walking toward the river, was probably like a couple miles up the property. This Bigfoot stepped out of the woods and jumped in front of them. And he says that this thing was two Andre the Giants, shoulder to shoulder. And he was explaining to me what this Bigfoot looked like, and he was saying it didn't have a neck, its eyes was deep, its nose was wide, had a sagittal crest of the head. And then before he went any further, I asked him, did this Bigfoot show you its teeth? He goes, yes. I go, did it rock back and forth? He goes, yes. I go, did it grab trees and bushes and started thrashing it? And he goes, man, he kind of questioned me. He goes, were you there? What the heck? And I told him continue. And so he told me that instead of going to go get the fish trap, they turned and they started running back to his trailer. And he said, this is where he said, this is the part where he said it stepped into the woods and the woods swallowed it up. And so this thing shadowed them going back to this guy's trailer, and it was moving trees. He said it was moving trees like it was like knocking trees out of the way, and you could see it from this trail. The bushes and trees were moving, and he said this was the damnedest thing. He says it was talking like it was Japanese, and I go, what? He goes, it was talking like it's Japanese. I go, like a sumo guy, like a sumo wrestler. Because he imitated. I'm probably going to butcher the way he did it, but the way he said it, he was going and it was talking as it was shadowing them out of this area. And so um, when they got to the house, this guy had a really really mean dog. It was a pit bull, and it was on a chain. And when I were running back, this dog was trying to break the chain, trying to get, to the house with them. And it was like yiping and it was like a mean dog. He said it was the meanest dog I've ever seen. And as they got back to the house, they didn't tell the wives what happened. They kind of kept it to themselves. And I think years later, this gentleman, he never told his wife what happened. And I think he got a divorce because of it. And he was telling me he was having these night terrors for years and years and years. Because I think this happened to him in '97 or something like that. And um, I was explaining to him that this thing was not going to kill him, and he didn't believe. He goes, I don't believe you. I don't care what you say. This thing. I go. If this thing really wanted to kill you, it would have done it with no hesitation. I go, what you end up doing is that you stepped in front of its food source. So it found that fish trap was his and no longer your brother-in-law's. So now it belonged to him. So you stepped into his way of getting food and providing for its family. And he never once thought this thing had a family or had little babies or anything like that. He just thought of it as a monster, a pure monster, and it wanted to kill him. And I think I talked to him for maybe about, you know, every other month for like maybe 3 years. And we end up, to this day, we still talk. But he said that his night terrors went away after I talked to him and after I reassured him what it was. And I think he started researching a little bit more himself and started reading a little bit more about incidents and stuff like that. But that one was really concerning because he said initially when he came up to the trailer, there was holes in his trailer. And he was thought when he saw these holes, he says, man, this dumb brother-in-law of his was shooting at the trailer with a shotgun. And then his brother-in-law later said that this Bigfoot would come up and punch holes in its trailer. And he had hogs too, so he would take his hogs, like 300-pound hogs, and it would carry it away. And so I thought, you know, that's probably one of the most interesting stories that I've come to talk to anybody about.
Do you think there was a lack of resource as far as game for the Bigfoot to eat off of in the area or something?
Whenever I dove deeper into it, I asked him how long was his brother-in-law out there, and he says he wasn't out there for very long. I think his mom had owned the property before, and so he put a trailer out there. So what I thought it was that this Bigfoot, this whole area was his, and now this guy's living there, and he's got his family, and he's got animals out there. So it thought that, okay, you want to come here and take away my food source, I'm gonna take away yours, and I'm gonna scare you out of the area. So that's what I kind of thought it was, and that's what I was telling him. And I was asking him. I said, "Man, I want to go back. I want to go to this property. I want to go look at it." And to this day, he refuses to tell me the address. I know it's in Longview somewhere in Texas, Longview, Texas, and I just don't want to drive around down there and just have the cops pull me over when I'm driving around trying to find this property. But I asked him, I said, can you talk to your mother-in-law? Can you give me the address? And I mean, if this Bigfoot's that aggressive, I want to go out there. I want to see it for myself. But he doesn't do it to this day. And and it's not personal. He just doesn't want to be involved in that anymore. Because he goes, I don't ever want to go to the woods again. I don't ever want to do any of that stuff. I'm okay staying in the city. So
I can understand that. That sounds like it would be a really scary kind of experience there.
yeah, yes. So that one always stuck out to me on that one. And there's been some incidents where I've been out on my own and I've had stuff happen to me. Like I know I can't think of the name of the casino right on the Oklahoma Texas border, but there's a casino there. It's right near a town called Thackerville, and they call it Brown Springs. And so it's got a big lore to it. There's a big lore to this area of Native Americans and settlers fighting in this area. And there was a story of some settlers coming through this area and trying to settle in Brown Springs. And they didn't call it Brown Springs at that time. And I think some of the settlers had kidnapped a Native American girl, and they raped her and stuff like that. And so she escaped and made it back to her tribe, and then the tribe went to go get like revenge, and they would go out and they caught these settlers and they staked them to the ground, and they left them for their, I can't think of it, but it was like a dog man type of entity that came out and got them and disemboweled them. This was lore I heard through someone else. And so there's a story of a couple in Greenville going to Thackerville and to go make out in this area. And there was a story, I heard it from, I think, a police officer or a constable, I can't remember. And we heard it through these gentlemen. And then this was like, man, probably like in the 70s or the 80s. And this was a lady that the boyfriend was killed. I believe his neck was broken, and the girl's legs were bent backwards. And then the report I heard is that she had primate semen inside her. And I don't know how they determined that or they even know it was primate. But that was the story that was going around the internet. So I went out to go investigate this area. And Linda, let me just tell you, this is probably the strangest place I've ever been. I know I've talked about strange stories, but this one place in particular in Brown Springs, Oklahoma, it had so much negative vibes there. When I walked out of my vehicle, I had a heavy impression on my chest, like I had a hard time breathing. And this was like during the daytime too. I went with two other colleagues, and I took my cousin because my cousin wanted to do a Bigfoot excursion, so I took him during the daytime, and he had his wife with him too. And so we get out and we walk the Red River. Um, we walk up the Red River to see if we can find anything. And then as we're walking back, the vehicle that we had there was a tree pushed over in front of it, and there was like 14-inch prints around this vehicle because it had just rained, and I thought that was extremely strange. And so one of the guys tell me, because hey Bob, do your Bigfoot call. And so I did a Bigfoot call, probably like one or two, and then we got a response on the other side of the Red River. Probably like six more calls called back to me, but you could hear it going further away, like it was walking away. Like we were like we were disturbing its time in that area. And I later went back and researched this area, and it comes to find out that the Dallas mob used to dump bodies in this area, like in the 40s and the 50s. And so I was thinking, I said, man, and this is what when I went back to this story and as I was researching it, I was thinking, I go, man, this is probably one of those times where, um, can you hear that? That lawnmower?
No.
Okay. It was probably one of those stories that this Bigfoot used EMF, or he was attracted to EMF. If you have all these bodies in this area, and then you have Bigfoot activity, and then you have all this lore there. I mean, I don't know. It was the strangest feeling I've ever had. It was like it's like I couldn't breathe the whole time I was there. I had a hard time breathing. And by the time we got in our vehicles and left, then I was okay. I felt okay and I was able to breathe. It was just a strange feeling. And I've only been there once, and I think I've talked about it. I've talked to other people who've been there, and they've had similar feelings as well. So it's very strange.
Well, there are definitely places that that do hold some very interesting and negative energy. I'm going to go ahead and end our interview today. I thank you very much for sharing all of these really fascinating stories with me. Sounds like we have a whole other show out there to go over the rest of it, but
Yeah.
um, we just get started and have to end. So I do appreciate it, however.
Linda, is it okay if I push the podcast?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
People can reach out to us on social media. They could just type in Bigfoot the number one, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X. And then if they go to our website, www.bigfootclubpodcast.com, they can see all our episodes, all our old episodes. We have merch there. We have profiles of myself and my co-host Stephen, my nephew, and so they can reach out to us there. And if they have any stories or if they have any concerns, they can reach us at Bigfoot Bigfoot Club 1 at gmail.com.